Hello everyone. So we begin with the Anglo-Saxon age. But I don't want you to think of it merely as the first chapter in the history of English literature. It is not just a list of dates, kings, battles, tribes and texts. It is the foundation on which the idea of England, the English language and early English literature slowly came into being. So let us begin with a very basic question. What is history? Most of us think history means the past. We assume that history is simply a record of what happened long ago. But that is only partly true. The past is what happened. History is how we remember, organize, interpret, and narrate what happened. This difference is very important to remember. The past is gone. We cannot directly access it. We cannot go back and see the Anglo-Saxons sitting in their halls, listening to poetry, fighting battles, or building kingdoms. What we have are the traces. We have manuscripts, ruins, chronicles, coins, oral traditions, place names, religious records, and literary works. History is made from these traces. It collects them, arranges them, interprets them, and often rewrites them. This means history is not dead. It is a living process. Every generation asks new questions from the past. Every generation reads old evidence differently. That is why when we study the Anglo-Saxon age, we are not merely memorizing facts, we are trying to understand how a society imagined itself, how it formed its identity, how it changed, and how its literature reflected those changes. The Anglo-Saxon age is especially interesting because it belongs to a time when history and myth are often mixed together. Many early stories were not written down immediately. They were sung, remembered, and passed from one generation to another. Wandering singers, minstrels, and bards performed heroic songs in gatherings and feasts. These songs preserved memories of battles, kings, warriors, and heroic deeds. But they also added imagination, exaggeration, and cultural pride. So when we read about this period, we must be careful. We are dealing with a world where fact and legend often overlap. Another problem is the loss of text. Many works from the Anglo-Saxon period have disappeared. Some were never written down, some manuscripts were destroyed in wars, fires, raids, and plunder. Remember, there was no printing press. Books were written by hand, copied by scribes, and preserved mainly in monasteries and abbeys. Writing a book was expensive, slow, and difficult. Literacy was limited to a very small section of society, usually religious men. This is why whatever survives from this period is precious. Even a manuscript design, a margin decoration, a coin, or a place name can become historical evidence. Now let us move to the larger question. How did England become England? Before the Anglo-Saxons arrived, Britain was inhabited by Celtic people. These people were skilled in agriculture, weaving, metalwork, and ornament making. They had their own culture, stories, and languages, but they did not leave behind a large written history. Much of what we know about them comes through the later records and external accounts. The Romans entered Britain first under Julius Caesar around 55 to 54 BCE, but his attempt was not very successful. Later, under Emperor Claudius, Roman quest became more effective. The Romans defeated Celtic tribes and ruled southern Britain for several centuries. Roman rule brought major changes. The Romans introduced law, roads, fortified towns, drainage system, taxation, and Latin influence. Londinium, which later became London, was one of the important Roman towns. Roman civilization was largely town-based. This is important because the later Anglo-Saxons would be more rural and countryside-oriented. But Roman Britain was never fully Roman in the way Rome itself was. Roman officers and traders often came for duty and returned home. The population became mixed: Romans, Roman Britons, and native Britons. When Roman rule weakened and the Roman army withdrew to defend Rome from attacks elsewhere, Britain became vulnerable. Now this created a power vacuum. The northern tribes such as Picts and Scots attacked, pirates troubled the English Channel, towns deteriorated, the Britons needed help. According to Bede, they invited Saxon warriors to defend them. Two famous names associated with this story are Hengst and Horsa, who came around 449 CE. But the invited defenders soon became conquerors. Angles, Saxons, Jutes, and other Germanic tribes began to settle in Britain. They came from regions that we now associate with Germany and Denmark. The Britons were pushed westward, especially towards Wales. The Celtic language did not disappear completely, but it lost prestige. Some Celtic words survived in place names and river names such as London, Avon, Thames, Devon, and Kent. The Germanic tribes divided the land into kingdoms. The Saxons occupied Essex, Wessex, and Sussex. The Angles occupied East Anglia and Northumbria. The Jutes, settled mainly in Kent, Mercia, emerged as another powerful kingdom. Together, these kingdoms are often called the Heptarchy, meaning 7 kingdoms. But these kingdoms were not peacefully united. They fought among themselves for power. First Northumbria became powerful, then Mercia, then Wessex. Strong kings tried to dominate other kingdoms and sometimes took the title Bretwalda, meaning overlord. This political struggle slowly produced a sense of unity. Ironically, conflict helped create the idea of England. So, this political struggle slowly produced a sense of unity. Ironically, conflict helped create the idea of England. Now, we come to one of the most important figures of the Anglo-Saxon age, King Alfred of Wessex. Alfred became king in 871 during a difficult time. The Danes of Vikings had begun attacking England. They raided monasteries, towns, and settlements. Alfred first struggled against them and was even defeated at Kippenham in 878. He had to hide in the woods, but he gathered his strength, returned, and defeated the Danish leader Guthrum at Edington. The Treaty of Wedmore divided territory. Alfred controlled Wessex and nearby areas, while the Danes controlled the Danelaw. But the Alfred's importance is not only military. He strengthened defense, built ships, reformed law, encouraged learning, translated important texts, and supported the writing of Anglo-Saxon chronicle. This matters a lot. Alfred understood that a kingdom needs more than swords. It needs memory, language, law, education, and writing. Under him, English identity became stronger. The idea of Anglesin, meaning the English people, slowly moved towards Engla-land, the land of English. After Alfred, rulers such as Edward and Ethelfled continued the work of expansion and consolidation, but later kings faced renewed Danish attacks. Eventually, Knut, a Danish ruler, became king in 1016. Later, Edward the Confessor came to the throne. He had been raised in Normandy, and his Norman connections prepared the ground for the next great change, the Norman conquest of 1066. But before reaching 1066, we must understand Anglo-Saxon society. Early Anglo-Saxon government was not absolute monarchy in the modern sense. The king depended on the loyalty of his people. Local decisions were made in assemblies of free men called folk moots. Later, smaller divisions such as hundreds and shires developed. A larger council called the Witan or Assembly of Wise Men advised the king. The Witan included nobles, landowners, and later bishops and archbishops. It could make laws, amend laws, elect kings, and even depose them. So, early Anglo-Saxon kingship had a consultative structure. It was not a democracy as we understand it today, but it was completely autocratic either. So it was not completely autocratic either, I'll correct myself. So early Anglo-Saxon kingship had a consultative structure. It was not democracy as we understand it today, but it was not completely autocratic either. Economically, Anglo-Saxon England gradually became prosperous. Trade improved across the Channel and the North Sea. Silver coins became important for everyday transactions. King Offa of Mercia controlled coinage and profited from it. Towns grew, trade expanded, but prosperity also attracted invaders, especially the Vikings. Society was stratified. At the top were nobles, at the bottom were slaves, in the middle were free men. A person's social value was expressed through vergeld or man money. If someone was killed, the killer had to pay compensation to the victim's family. A noble had a higher vergeld than a free man. A slave had no vergeld of his own, although his owner could be compensated. This tells us something crucial about Anglo-Saxon society. Violence, revenge, honor, and compensation were deeply woven into social life. Now we can understand why heroic literature became so important. Anglo-Saxon literature grows out of a heroic culture. This heroic culture was based on the relationship between a lord and his warriors. The lord gave protection, treasure, gifts, and honor in return. The warrior gave loyalty, service, and courage. This bond was sacred in social terms. A warrior was expected to stand by his lord even unto death. The center of this culture was the mead hall. The hall was not just a building, it was the emotional and political center of the community. People gathered there to eat, drink, listen to poetry, celebrate victories, and remember heroic deeds. The poet or a scop played a vital role. Through the song, he preserved memory and created shared identity. This is why poetry was not entertainment alone, it was cultural memory. The Anglo-Saxon world valued bravery, loyalty, fame, honor, and revenge. A warrior wanted lof, meaning praise, and dom, meaning glory, or judgment of worth. A heroic person was remembered through song. To be forgotten was almost like a second death. This heroic spirit appears powerfully in Beowulf. Although Beowulf is about a Scandinavian hero, it became central to English literary history because it values matched Anglo-Saxon heroic culture. The poem shows courage, loyalty, monster fighting, kingship, generosity, fate, and the desire for lasting fame. But Anglo-Saxon literature is not only heroic, it is also elegiac. The same society that celebrated heroic glory also understood loss, exile, loneliness, and instability. If a warrior lost his lord, he lost protection, identity, and social belonging. Poems like The Wanderer and the Seafarer capture this deep sense of exile and sorrow. The world is unstable. Halls decay, lords die, companions disappear. The sea becomes a space of hardship and spiritual searching. This brings us to the second major force that shaped Anglo-Saxon England, Christianity. Christianity came to Britain in two phases. First, it arrived with the Romans, but its influence weakened after the Anglo-Saxon invasion because the Anglo-Saxons were pagan. The second and more lasting phase began in 597 CE, when Pope Gregory the Great sent Augustine to Kent. Augustine landed to Ebbsfleet, the same region associated with Hungseth and Horsa's arrival. This is symbolically important. One arrival brought Germanic conquest, another brought Christian transformation. King Ethelbert of Kent converted first and his kingdom followed. Other kingdoms slowly accepted Christianity. Celtic missionaries also played an important role, especially from the Ireland and Scotland. St. Aidan founded a monastery at Lindisfarne in 634. However, Roman Christianity and Celtic Christianity differed in some practices. The Synod of Whitby in 664 settled the matter in favor of the Roman Church. Later, Theodore of Tarsus, Archbishop of Canterbury, organized the church more systematically. He divided the land into dioceses and held synods. These gatherings helped create unity beyond separate kingdoms. People could now think of themselves not only as members of a tribe or kingdom, but as members of a larger Christian community. Christianity changed Anglo-Saxon society deeply. It brought literacy, manuscript culture, monasteries, Latin learning, religious education, and new moral values. But the change was not simple or immediate. Heroic values and Christian values often conflicted. In heroic culture, pride, boasting, courage, revenge, and fame were admired. A warrior might make a beot, a ritual boast, or vow before battles. He would publicly declare that he would perform a very difficult heroic act. That was seen as bravery. But Christianity valued humility, peace, forgiveness, and obedience to God. What heroic culture admired as courage, Christianity could sometimes see as pride. What the warrior saw as honor, Christianity could see as worldly vanity. Yet, Anglo-Saxon culture did not simply abandon heroic ideals. Instead, it blended them with Christian thought. This blending is one of the most fascinating features of Anglo-Saxon literature. In Beowulf, we see a pagan heroic world, preserved through a Christian manuscript culture. The poem contains both heroic values and Christian reflections. Beowulf fights monsters like a heroic warrior, but the poem also reflects on God, faith, sin, and moral order. The Dream of the Rood is another powerful example. In this poem, Christ is represented almost like an Anglo-Saxon hero who willingly climbs the cross as if entering the battle. The cross itself speaks like a loyal retainer. Christian salvation is expressed through heroic language. So, Christianity did not erase the heroic imagination, it transformed it. The church also changed politics. Earlier, kings depended on the loyalty of warriors and the approval of assemblies. With Christianity, kingship became sacred. The king could be seen as chosen by God. Disobeying the king could become not merely a political act but a religious sin. This strengthened monarchy. Church and state supported each other. The king protected the church legitimized the king. Together, they created a more centralized authority. This also changed land relations. The older, mobile heroic society gradually moved towards a more settled land-based feudal structure. The warrior band or comites slowly became landed nobility. People became more tied to the land, law, and hierarchy. Now let us connect all of this to literature. The literature of the Anglo-Saxon age reflects social transformation. At first, literature was oral, heroic, and communal. It celebrated battles, warriors, loyalty, and fame. Later, with Christianity, literature became written, religious, didactic, and reflective. Monasteries became centers of learning. Latin texts were copied and translated. Religious prose developed. Homilies and sermons, biblical translations, saints' lives, and moral writings became important. Alfred's translation project helped strengthen English as a language of learning. This is why the Anglo-Saxon age is not simply the beginning of English literature. It is the age in which English literature learns to remember, write, translate, moralize, mourn, and imagine community. Let us now summarize the main idea. The English identity did not appear suddenly. It was formed through layers of migration, conquest, cultural mixture, political struggle, economic change, heroic values, and Christian transformation. The Celts were the first. The Romans came and changed towns, roads, laws, and administrations. The Anglo-Saxons came and reshaped language, settlement, and culture. The Danes came and influenced politics and vocabulary. Christianity came and transformed morality, literacy, kingship, and literature. So, England was never pure in origin. It was always a mixture. This is one of the most important lessons to the Anglo-Saxon age. The English language and English identity were formed through contact, conflict, borrowing, violence, adoption, and memory. When we read Anglo-Saxon literature, we are reading this process. We are reading a society trying to understand itself. Beowulf shows us the heroic world. The wanderer shows us exile and loss. The seafarer shows hardship and spiritual longing. The Dream of the Rood shows Christian faith expressed through heroic imagination. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle shows history becoming written memory. Alfred's translations show the rise of English as a language of knowledge. Therefore, the Anglo-Saxon age gives us the first major foundation of English literary culture. It teaches us that literature is never separate from society. Literature changes when society changes. When the economy changes, social relations change. When religion changes, values change. When political power changes, language changes. When people migrate, stories travel. When stories travel, cultures transform. This is why we cannot study English literature only as a set of texts. We must study the world that produced those texts. So, when you think of the Anglo-Saxon age, remember 5 major ideas. First, history is not the same as the past. History is interpretation. Second, England was formed through cultural mixture, not purity. Third, heroic culture shaped English literature through values like loyalty, courage, fame, and lordship. Fourth, Christianity transformed literacy, kinship, morality, and literary imagination. Fifth, Anglo-Saxon literature records a movement from oral heroic poetry to written Christian literature. This movement is the beginning of English literary history. And that is why the Anglo-Saxon age matters. It is not remote, primitive, or irrelevant. It is the place where the English language begins to carry memory, grief, faith, violence, power, and imagination. When we read this age carefully, we do not merely ask what happened. We ask, how did a people become a people? How did a language become literary? How did oral songs become manuscripts? How did warriors become Christian heroes? How did scattered tribes become England? These are the questions that make the Anglo-Saxon age foundational for the study of English literature. Here we end with the Anglo-Saxon age, and in the next lectures we will continue covering one topic after the other. If you have any other suggestion or the way or the things that I should include in the lectures, do comment below. Thank you.